Hola.
So we are recording and live stream is on.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, good night, or good morning to all of you. We are so pleased to have people in this meeting from all parts of the world in different time zones. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago, a teacher for the past 15 years. And ladies and gentlemen, this is our 218th edition of our ICC Thought Leaders Forum. We wish to sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora Global Project. For 217 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. And in the past 4 years, 2 months, and 2 weeks, we have featured 1,007 presenters from all parts of the world speaking on 217 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Caribbean Cultural Center, legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And like today, we often partner with the Amina Ghafoor Institute for the Study of Indentureship and its Legacies, led by Professor David Davidine, who is here with us in the meeting tonight. In order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are kindly asking for suggestions as well as volunteers. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials, and you can contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for details. So ladies and gentlemen, I'll introduce you to our moderator, who is Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of this ICC Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalama, welcome.
Thanks so much, Shakir. Assalamu alaikum, namaste, and a warm welcome to all of you. Thanks for choosing to be here with us, and thank you so much for your patience as we got started today with a few technical difficulties. This program is being recorded on Zoom and live streamed on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. Welcome to all of you on YouTube at this time. To avoid intrusions from trolls, our IT manager has muted everyone. Speakers, please do not admit anyone, do not unmute anyone, and do not allow anyone to share your screen. Thank you so much for cooperating. Today, we are talking about Indo-Caribbean migrants in England over the period 1948 to 1973. The Windrush generation was named after the ship MV Empire Windrush, which brought the first large group of West Indian migrants to the UK on June 22nd, 1948. The Windrush generation refers to Caribbean migrants who traveled to England from 1948 to 1973. Many of them were of Indian descent, a little known fact because they are hardly mentioned in discourses about the Windrush generation. They were all invited to help rebuild the country after World War II. Today, we will hear about the Indo-Caribbean migrants, descendants of Indian indentured laborers who were brought to the Caribbean. And these migrants contributed significantly to the UK's economy and cultural diversity. We will also hear about the considerable challenges which they faced, including racial discrimination and socioeconomic hardships, while striving to integrate into British society. To what extent were they successful? We'll hear about that as well. In their book titled The Other Windrush, Legacies of Indenture in Britain's Caribbean Empire, editors Maria Calladine and David Davidine highlight the hidden history of a minority within a minority. Caribbean migrants of Indian and Chinese descent who were the invisible passengers of the Windrush generation. It is therefore most appropriate that we invite Dr. Maria Calladine to speak first. She is an Associate Fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies and editor at the Amina Ghafoor Institute, who has partnered with us for today's program. Welcome, Maria. Go ahead, please.
Thanks so much. I'm just going to open up my PowerPoint presentation for you. Could you kindly confirm, Shalima, you're able to see everything?
Yes, we can.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Then I'll start. Thanks, first of all, to the ICC for hosting me. It's always a pleasure to be here. I've taken the title of today's talk from a 2001 novel by Moses Nagamutu called Henry's Cure. The novel is set in the 1950s and 1960s, and the quotation is an excerpt from a conversation between two Berbetian Guyanese fishermen, where one of them asks the other what it is he's dreaming of as he looks out to sea. Last summer, I wrote an article in which I tried for the first time to bring together some ideas in order to start to explore Indian Caribbean writers' relationship with the Windrush migration. Much of what I share with you today is distilled from this finished article, and I would encourage you, if you find the talk interesting, to follow the link that I will share in the chat later and read more about this topic. My article was published in the Journal for the Study of Indentureship and Its Legacies, which is entirely free to access and contains, beyond my humble offering, many brilliant pieces by excellent academics working in the field of indentureship studies. In 1961, my Guyanese father, pictured on the right-hand side here, then aged 23, boarded a ship bound for England to become one of around 450,000 people from the Caribbean, men, women, and children, who would in later years come to be framed as the Windrush generation. While we can never know what was behind each individual migration, what we can say with certainty is that a large proportion of these migrants were responding to calls for help from a Britain that had been devastated by the Second World War. At a 2023 service to commemorate 75 years since the arrival of the Empire Windrush, King Charles described the contribution that this generation had made to the UK as immeasurable, further referencing them as indomitable. It is my personal experience as a child of this migration from a family of children born to a mixed marriage that the racism of this period was as indestructible as the generation that experienced it. In spite of what they endured, the list of notable Britons in public life who trace their roots to this migration is endless, from designers, writers, and activists to politicians, musicians, athletes, footballers, and members of the armed forces. In recent years, an increased awareness of the extent to which the Windrush generation were instrumental in the building and rebuilding of British institutions has meant that a space has opened up where people like myself, who form minorities in this story, may speak about their experiences as part of this migration and challenge the idea that the Windrush migration was a uniquely African Caribbean experience. One of the major challenges that face descendants of indenture who invite others to consider their identity as part of the Windrush generation is the huge, and some might say deliberate, knowledge gap in the UK around the indenture system. British people are not taught about the indenture system in school, and their ignorance of this period of history is compounded by our major cultural institutions omitting the story of indenture from permanent exhibitions. From the point at which I connected my own family's migration story to the Windrush generation, it has been my privilege to contribute to a more nuanced understanding of this migration. As a consequence of the Windrush Jubilee of 70 years in 2018, I have had the opportunity to create events, write articles, and ultimately edit an anthology by descendants of the indenture system in the Caribbean who were also part of or children of the Windrush generation. In the introduction to this anthology, I wrote the following lines. Despite the strong sense of Caribbean identity that connects the contributors to this book, many of us have experienced throughout our lives the blank looks of those who have struggled to place us when we respond to that most loaded of questions, where are you from? Far too few people in the United Kingdom know about the system of indenture in the Caribbean and the people of Chinese and Indian descent that it left in the region. Fewer still are aware that alongside African Caribbean people, the descendants of these indentured labourers formed part of the Windrush generation of migrants from the region to Britain between 1948 and 1971. While this book reflects on the challenges experienced by a community who have effectively lived their lives as a minority within a minority, it is also a celebration of what has been made possible in spite of our invisibility, and the creative ways we have resisted the silence that surrounds our cultural history. It is in reference to the idea of creativity that I would like to take this short talk in a literary direction in order to pay homage to the Indian Caribbean writers, some of whom were complicating the Windrush story before either I was born or my father had arrived in the UK. It is impossible to speak about the literary contribution made by Indian Caribbean writers without referencing the novelists Samuel Selvon and V.S. Naipaul, who both arrived in the UK in the same year, 1950. Selvon is widely regarded to have written the literary work of the Windrush period in his classic novel on the physical and psychological struggles of the men that people the lonely Londoners, published in 1956. Despite Selvon's admission that he wrote the principal character Moses as an Indian Caribbean man, The Lonely Londoners is continually referred to as a work of Black British literature. Its various covers over the years portraying photographs or illustrations that depict African Caribbean Windrushers during this period. As far as both writers are concerned, and the scholar Lisa Uttar has pointed out, Selvon and Naipaul are rarely examined in relation to being both Indian and Caribbean in a diasporic context. To me, what makes Lisa Uttar's comment even more acute is that if we follow the clues laid out in Naipaul's own writing, in his 1985 work, Finding the Centre, it is his Indian Caribbean heritage that motivated his first novel. While he was working for the BBC in the heart of Windrush, Britain, according to Finding the Centre, he began a creative process of going back, and this was a specific return to the Indian community of the street that he had lived on in Port of Spain as a child. According to Finding the Centre, his start as a novelist comes from the first line of Miguel Street that he writes in the BBC Freelancers Room, which in turn becomes his first completed novel, although not his first published novel. As he describes himself in a later work, The Enigma of Arrival. And it was that fear, a panic about failing to be what I should be, rather than simple ambition, that was with me when I came down from Oxford in 1954 and began trying to write in London. My father had died the previous year. Our family was in distress. I should have done something for them, gone back to them. But without having become a writer, I couldn't go back. In my 11th month in London, I wrote about Bogart. I wrote my book. I wrote another. I began to go back. Without doubt, the work of these two writers contributed to the creation of an atmosphere in which later writers of the Windrush era felt freer to articulate a distinctly Indian Caribbean portrait of the Windrush experience. Two of David Dabberdine's works, Coolie Odyssey, a collection of poems published in 1988, and his first novel, The Intended, published in 1991, both explore Indian Caribbean life in London during the Windrush era, as does Ellie Nyland's 2021 essay, From BG to GB, and her poetry, published in the collection Cornerstones. It is not overstating the case to say that we owe a massive debt to publishers like Hansi Publications, headed by Windrusher Arif Ali, who were based for a long time in London's Finsbury Park, and the Leeds-based publisher People Tree Press. Both have been instrumental in supporting Indian Caribbean writing in the last 4 decades. What I want to do in the last part of this talk is showcase some of the diversity of writing by Indian Caribbean writers of the Windrush period by taking you through a very brief survey of the ways in which they've represented this migration in their writing. What I hope to emphasize here is the wealth of different experiences and responses that exist in the literature, and argue that we have really just touched the surface of an exploration of the other Windrush. Moses Nagamutu's novel Hendry's Cure, published in 2001, offers an important critique of the Windrush narrative in its rejection of the dual forces of colonialism and capitalism that are seen to drive Guyanese across the Atlantic during this period. Nagamutu's novel is relatively unique in the Caribbean literary canon in that it's currently the only work of fiction to focus specifically on the South Indian Caribbean community in an Anglophone Caribbean setting. Set in the 50s and 60s in a small village named Wim in Berbice, Guyana, its commitment to honouring this minority is carried out with skill and great humour. Tilaki, a fisherman who dreams of living in England, has his dreams brutally disrupted by the reality of the grim metropolitan London landscape. It becomes obvious to Tilaki during his time in London that he cannot live without his village, and the accomplishment of his mission to make a drum to replicate the familiar South Indian sounds of home offer him his only relief from an otherwise miserable existence in a windowless basement room. His eventual return to Guyana is both joyful and absolute. Writing by Guyana's Ellie Island and Trinidad's Lakshmi Prasad, both of whom are pictured here, Ellie on the left and Lakshmi Prasad on the right, offer important reflections on how familial spaces of belonging are negotiated in the metropole. Ellie Nyland's 2021 essay, From BG to GB, which forms part of the anthology The Other Windrush, portrays a loving relationship that survives the colour bar of both Britain and Ireland during the Windrush era. As is typical of Nyland's work, she achieves this with great humour, and her moving portrayal of her flight from Burnham's Guyana to Tooting in South London is dotted as frequently with comic moments as it is with tragedy. Lakshmi Prasad's novel Daughters of Empire, which was published in 2012, also nods to the combination of resistance and accommodation necessary for survival in the mother country. This process of survival is neatly summed up in the remembrance by Amira, the central character of Daughters of Empire, of her father's words to her. Take the hits, but keep moving forward, my daughter, keep moving forward. There is a continuous sense in Prasad's novel that the Indian Trinidadian community she has left behind is omnipresent in her new life. Amira constantly hears the critical voices of her family in her head. In particular, is the voice of her sister that weighs her down as she tries to negotiate the new rules of life in the mother country. Ultimately, what can be felt to define the literature of the Indian Caribbean Windrush period is the sheer diversity of our backgrounds and experiences. Whether it is Naipaul looking back to the metropolitan Indian Trinidadian community of Miguel Street to write his first novel, or Lakshmi Prasad reimagining in the 21st century the sisterhoods that protected Indian women on plantations in the 19th and 20th, these works are united by an awareness of the importance of representing distinctly Indian Caribbean Windrush stories. What the texts say most powerfully is that what empire signified for all Windrushers and how they experienced it was not the same. From the journey of a young man from a Berbetian fishing village to the high-achieving Trinidadian Oxford-bound, each story has its value and each tells a different version of what it was to experience the other Windrush. Kind thanks, Shalima, I'm finished just there.
All right, excellent, Maria. Thank you very much. I especially liked that quote from Lakshmi Prasad, and it really spoke to every migrant, I think, every migrant's ability to survive in the land in which they settled. Do we have any questions for Dr. Maria Caldine? If you have a question, please raise your electronic hand. It's at the reactions button at the base of your screen. Yes, Mr. Michael Mitchell, please go ahead, unmute your mic. Mr. Mitchell, please unmute your mic. I'm not hearing him.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, I didn't have my hand raised. I had a clapping hand to say thank you very much to Maria and for a really interesting contribution. So sorry to hold you all up. That was just appreciation.
The appreciation is welcome. I'm sure she appreciates it. Thank you. Maria, I'm just going to move on. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll be able to take some questions and some comments at the end of all the presentations. So Maria, if you look in the chat, there's several lots of appreciation for your presentation. Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, our second speaker is Mr. Vidur Dindial. He's 90 years old. He's no stranger to us, just like Maria. He was born in 1934 in Claremont Sugar Plantation in Guyana. He migrated to India and then later to England in 1962 at the age of 27 as part of the Windrush generation, where he became an author and an architect. Welcome, Mr. Dindial. Shakira, please just let us have his PowerPoint. Thanks. Uncle B, can you unmute?
Right. Good afternoon or whatever it is. Is it okay? Ready?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I have a simple story about how people came here and got on with life. And basically, the UK was always seen as a place for betterment, as a mother country, as the best of everything. And so we aspire to that. And we Indians from we Indo-Caribbeans, of course, we know about our background. We came from, our ancestors were from India as indentured laborers, my grandfather, etc., and his colleagues, and they came and settled there and so on. Yeah, they came to Britain for a better life. A few friends of mine, we heard about discrimination and racism, etc., but that didn't put us off coming here to better ourselves. A few of my friends and relations came in the 50s, and they got married and have children and grandchildren, etc. So that is the story that I know of and familiar with. Quite a few friends of mine. And lots of them that I know went and worked in the buses in London transport buses. A couple of them, a cousin of mine and my wife was a bus driver, and he stuck to that number 73 bus all his life, and he was able to buy a house and look after his family, and he's got children and grandchildren, get them married and so on. Another one was a man and his wife. We knew him in Guyana. He came here, he was a bus driver, the wife was a bus conductor. I, in fact, traveled in a bus with her and said hello. Her name was Ivy. So there we go. And I came, and a few of us came and settled in Brixton. A person whom I know as a sister of mine, regard as a sister of mine. She was a nurse in Guyana, and we're looking at the bank there. I mean, just moving on to the bank business. The first person that gave me a room to live in when I came was a friend from Guyana, from Kanji, and she was working in the bank. Her husband, her brother-in-law, was a classmate of mine at Barbicide School. So she was working at Westminster Bank, that actual bank. And she's been there ever since, and I retired there. And her husband was working in the civil service, and he stuck with it since the 60s, early 60s. and he retired as a senior person in there in the civil service. So that was it. But going back to the person who I regard as my sister, she was a nurse in Guyana, a midwife. When she came here, I believe she got qualifications here, and she was working at St. Thomas's Hospital for as long as I know, and various other hospitals. And she retired as a sister. So I'm very proud of her. In fact, and there's a cousin of my wife who was also a nurse, and she's got a photograph. And now I go to visit them, I always see that photograph with her shaking hands with the Queen when she was a nurse in some hospital. So I'm very proud of her. She has passed away, sadly. A number of them, indeed, yes. And you see a person at the back there. Who knows? It could be her. But then a number of friends of mine and people I know went into law and things, because I also did that, went into law, because you can work and study with that and so on. And they qualified as lawyers, etc. But a very, very, very relevant point was that both Hindus and Muslims, they stuck together, and the Hindus, fellow Indo-Caribbeans, in fact, a very important member of our group was from Trinidad. He went back to Trinidad, he passed away there. But they built a Hindu temple. We used to meet at somebody's house now and again. But afterwards, we built that temple. They not built it. They bought a place and converted in a church hall, which they converted into a Hindu temple and a community center. That's Lincoln's Inn, where a number of friends of mine studied law and all of that. But going back to the community thing, the Hindus, two main groups that we know is the Caribbean Hindu Cultural Society. We've got that building, we bought it, and it's used as a community center and as a temple. And my brother built the stage for the murtis and all of that. And I contributed something, I can't remember now what it was, but oh yes, the Om sign. And there's another temple belonging to the Mahalakshmi Vidya Bhavan, which is just in South London. Equally, friends of mine who are Muslims, Abdul Ali, a very enterprising, typical Guyanese, that the mosque on the far right there is what it is now, but it started in an old building, community center sort of building, and it took about 3 stages to get to that stage that is now. And it's a wonderful building, and it's called London Islamic Cultural Center. In the middle is the one that I was telling you about, Mahalakshmi Bhavan, and on the far left is the Azamul Al-Muzamil Masjid. Muzamil is the middle name of a brother of ours who came from Essequibo, and he decided to build that. He was leader of the community, but mostly he is actually credited with building it. He's passed away now. So those things are a great prize for the community. They're community centers in many ways. We meet often in these places. Regardless of what the job was, in this country, you could get a job and then own a house eventually and get your children and so on looked out, educated and all of that. In addition to that, my father knew a few business people who came early. Hari Prasad is one of them. His children came with him, and near to where I'm living now, they were studying, and they all qualified, and they've got children and grandchildren, all of that now. And there's another businessman, a friend of my father-in-law, who came here many years ago, I think in the late 50s. He was a prominent businessman in Georgetown. He came here, and his daughters were very lucky. The eldest one was married to a doctor, the next one was an eye specialist, and the third one was a dentist, and so on. But of course, the celebrated Ramadan, the pictures that we see there is again an inspiration to us, because he even in the West Indies there was discrimination, but he was one of the first Indo-Guyanese to make such a great success of himself in cricket. And he was the celebrated Ramadan. He got married to an English lady, he's got children, grandchildren, he's passed away. And there were a couple, I don't know whether they live here, Rohan Kanhai and Joe Solomon. In fact, when I was coming here in 1962, I boarded the plane in Guyana with Rohan Kanhai, but he dropped off at Trinidad and I came along to here. So I'm not sure whether he lives here, but I've seen stories about him. Joe Solomon, I met at a social function here many years ago, and he was one of the cricketers, great cricketers in the West Indies team. So we're very proud of them. There's another man called Rudy Narayan, who is from a very prominent family in the Essequibo Coast. He turned out to be a controversial figure, but he was a bright person and a great speaker. And he was associated with discrimination things to do with a lot of people in South London and various other places. So he was also one of those. Arif Ali, the publisher, again, a very an enterprising thing. What do I know about publishing? But there you are. Arif Ali had Handship, the name of his company for many years, and there are many things produced by him. Another important person that I know personally, her father was a pharmacist in Guyana. And his name is Ganpat Singh. He's passed away now. He came here in the late 50s or early 60s. But his youngest daughter, I believe, Hazel Ganpat Singh, became a model. And she became friendly with the brother of Joan Collins. And there's a photograph of her as well there. And she's modeled quite a number of interesting things. So I'm very proud of them. Shakira Kane, of course, what do we say about her? She's married to Michael Caine, and she was a model, and she's done well, and they've stuck together. And I bumped into her mother because she comes from a village where my niece's mother-in-law belongs to. So I bumped into her like that. Professor Bishnudat Prasad, the husband of Lakshmi Prasad. He's a famous economist, international economist, and he was a schoolmate of mine at Warby School. He was in the class above. There's and Mark Rampakash, West Indies cricketer. I think he was, not England cricketer. I think he was captain at one time of England, but his father is Guyanese. There's Gina Miller, who had a famous case. She's related, I think, the daughter of a high school mate of mine, not a high school mate, not a classmate. So she did that case where challenged the government that they did the Brexit thing without going through Parliament, etc. Then, of course, there's another one, Baron Wahid Ali. Now, Wahid Ali, his mother, we are close friends. His brother is married to a relation of mine, his daughter. But his father and I came on the ship in 1956 when I was heading to England first and going on to India. We both met up on that ship. And so he's still around. So his father is Guyanese, but the mother is Trinidadian. That's Baron Wahid Ali. And of course, the famous V.S. Naipaul. What can you say more than that? So all of these things are proud things for me, the way my sort of thinking and the interests that I have are that they are Indo-Caribbeans, Indo-Guyanese, Indo-Trinidadians, and they all make me feel very proud. And so that's
Uncle
my
Vidur, thank you. Uncle Vidur, I just have one question. Can you tell us a little bit about the voyage on the ship? What was your
Which one?
experience on that ship?
Which one?
Well,
Because there were two ships, one from Trinidad to London,
and where
so
was the other one from?
from England to India. But it's interesting. I'll tell you about the one from Trinidad to. I was a vegetarian. In those days, nobody knew about vegetarianism. I just happened to be a vegetarian. It's a long story. From age 10 to when I left. But at home, there was no problem. My dad was a vegetarian, and whenever we went to family, they knew what we ate, so they didn't cook meat or fish. But in the ship, I thought I will eat what the black people ate, which is boiled fish or boiled food. But I thought at worst it would come to that. But this ship was a French ship, so I couldn't understand what the menu had. That's number one. And so I told the chap at first, I went to a table all by myself, and it was a bit nervous for me, not a bit nervous, quite a lot nervous. I'm on the ship for the first time in this posh dining room, and I'm going to order my dinner. So I told the waiter, please bring anything that is not meat or fish. Well, that sort of language isn't understood because every meal has got meat or fish. He brought the chef, and eventually they brought a ladle of rice with a sauce on top, which was called spinach, and I had my dinner. And the fellow passengers heard about my case, and we spoke, and he said, come to our table and I'm going to help you select. But that time, it was a very psychologically traumatic time for me. I sat down and wrote a very serious letter to my parents that I've got to give up vegetarianism. But not only that, I've got to eat whatever I can eat because I can't understand the menu. And all I knew about non-vegetarian food was fish or chicken or mutton. But you don't see it on the menu in that way. It's all French. So I said, I'll eat sardines. But the doctor and his people on the table saw to it that I had something to eat every time. And I came on, of course, it was exciting, that trip. When I went to Venezuela, I saw this modern city, and for the first time, I saw people well dressed in fancy clothes and all of that. It was fascinating. There's so much more I can tell you. But when I came to London, the people who received me, my father's friend's son, they were elder to me, immediately they received me. They took me to an Indian restaurant, which served chicken and curry and rice. They didn't ask me a question. They just took me there. And afterwards, they explained, they said, we know what you would have suffered.
And are you vegetarian now?
Oh, no. From that moment, I decided, I was going to India, which is vegetarian mainly, I thought that'd be no problem. But between Guyana and getting there, but on the ship from England to India was excellent food. Curry and rice for lunch and dinner. And the three things, fish, chicken, or mutton. And you had, it was excellent, the ship from here, from England to India. And what was pleasantly surprising, when we reached Karachi, there was a notice written in chalk on the notice board near to the exit. Thank our Indian friends for their companionship and happy trip to here. And equally, a reply from the Indian friends, thank our Pakistani friends for that. So
Wonderful.
we didn't know. I wasn't aware that there was an issue because everybody was sitting and eating. Lovely.
Mhm, mhm. We have one question from Vinay, and he wants to know whether or not Bhojpuri was spoken at the time when you landed in England, your first trip.
Bhojpuri. I did mention to you about Bhojpuri.
Mhm.
That the interest in Bhojpuri I do not subscribe to, for the simple reason that being in India, Bhojpuri is regarded as more like a dialect from UP,
Right, but
which our people learn. But I like to talk about Hindi as an Indian.
I understand that.
For the simple reason.
Right, but he wants to know whether or not when you had landed in England, remember we are talking about this particular period in time, whether Bhojpuri was spoken by the Indo-Caribbean people.
That I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of the word, in fact, at that time.
Mhm.
All we know about is Hindi. We try to learn Hindi. You know,
Right.
that's it. But I wasn't aware of that word at that time at all. It was only recently it's come up. And I said my view about that the Indians are they pigeonhole you and put you in your place. And Bhojpuri is related to village language and that. And so they immediately, India is a very hierarchical society, class-wise as well as caste-wise.
Mhm.
They don't talk about it much, but it is operating in society in that way.
Mhm.
So I like to pride myself as Indian number one, full stop. And I speak Hindi. We're Hindi speaking people, as opposed to Punjabi or Bengali or what. You follow?
Yeah.
Not a subdivision of that.
All right. Excellent. Thank you very, very much for your presentation and for sharing your life story as well.
Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, before we go on to the next speaker, what we want to do is to play a music video. And this is especially because we want to dedicate it to genealogist Shamsuddin, who celebrated his birthday on Thursday. Happy belated birthday to you, Uncle Sham. This song is also dedicated to Dr. Vijaya Kumar Kamar of Bangalore, India. You all will know him. He is on the program almost every single episode, and he's one of the first people to join in. He was awarded an honorary doctorate yesterday by the Mother Teresa University in the state of Tamil Nadu. So congratulations to you. Can we have that song, please? Uncle V, I know you will enjoy this as well.
चलो दिलदार चलो चांद के पार चलो हम भी तैयार चलो चलो दिलदार चलो चांद के पार चलो हम भी तैयार चलो चलो दिलदार चलो चांद के पार चलो हम भी तैयार चलो नींद आती है जगा दिलदार चलो चांद के पार चलो
हम हैं तैयार चलो
चलो दिलदार चलो चांद के पार चलो
हम हैं तैयार चलो
चलो दिलदार चलो चांद के पार चलो
हम हैं तैयार चलो
चलो दिलदार चलो चांद के पार चलो
हम हैं तैयार चलो
That was me and Auntie Sabita in the boat there.
I thought you could have picked out to this one. But as far as we go, that is from the movie Pakiza. It was really Meena Kumari and Raj Kumar, although we
I
couldn't
see.
see
I
her
thought it was
face.
me.
So, okay, I don't know if you were singing there, but it should have been Mohammed Rafi and Lata Mangeshkar. I hope you enjoyed it.
Beautiful song, best song in the world.
I know, beautiful. So, Guyana is known as the land of many waters. The song should have evoked many memorable images of its rivers. And Mr. Peter Ramraka, who we're going to bring on now, he migrated from Guyana to England in 1961. So, Mr. Ramraka, probably you can tell us whether or not that particular video would have evoked some good memories for you. About Mr. Ramraka, he joined the Royal Air Force as part of the Windrush generation. His autobiography titled Recycling a Son of the British Raj tells the story of his journey and challenges. But let's hear a little bit from him directly. Welcome, Mr. Ramraka.
Thank you very much, Alina. Have you got my presentation?
Yes, and Shakira will share it now.
All right, okay, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation to make a presentation. I apologize to everyone for the IT difficulties. I thought I had sent the presentation beforehand, but there were difficulties. Nevertheless, I hope that the song that we had just now, absolutely first class, really evoked lovely memories. Now, my presentation will be slightly different to that we had before. Certainly, the presentation from Maria give us a real tour of all the wonderful works, literature that is available. And from Vidur, we have actual life experiences of two ship journeys and how he remembered all the key people that Indo-Caribbean people that he'd met. And many of them were real pioneers. Rudy Narayan, he was really tremendous in representing the Caribbean people, regardless of race, and he was really well thought of. So, thank you for those two previous presentations. My presentation would be giving you examples of some of
Mr. Ramraka, excuse me, would you mind speaking a little bit louder, please? Your
All right,
volume is
well,
quite low.
yeah. Shall I put on my
Your headset, yes, that might help. Thank you.
can you hear me any better?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Let me see whether I put on my because I sometimes find that it's not. Let's see whether this will make a difference.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to miss anything that you have to share.
Right.
Mhm.
Can you hear me any better?
Much better. Thank you.
All right. So the slide that you're looking at, I would talk a little bit about the background. I'm focusing in what Indo-Caribbean people have done to make impact on their life in Britain and elsewhere, flying the flag of Indo-Caribbean people. I'll talk briefly about the challenges, the successes, and the future. Next slide, please. This is putting together 64 years of my life in Britain. It identifies the Royal Air Force, the roundel in the left-hand corner, the NHS, from 61 to 70, I was in the Royal Air Force. So that little chappie with his eyes closed on the right-hand side is meant to depict me. And the chap with a lot of hair and the pinstripe suit is meant to be me in the consultancies and the various things that I've done in civil society. And I acknowledge my friend, Rod Vesmus, one of the dynamic duos, as I call them in Vienna speak, the other, Juanita Cox. They did, or Rod did this picture for me when we were putting together the book Memory, Migration, and Decolonization in the Caribbean and Beyond. Next slide, please. For colleagues who are on the call and don't know where on earth Guyana is, which might be very unusual, it's in the extreme right of the picture, tucked in the corner there. And of course, although it's in South America, we are very much Caribbean people. Next slide, please. The Empire Windrush, this is a sort of an abbreviation of the 25-year history of the Windrush, Empire Windrush. It was launched in 1930. I'm just getting it up so I can see it as I talk. It was seized for war reparation in 1945 and sadly caught fire and sunk. The Empire Windrush, when it arrived, mostly the impression at the time was that it was bringing back British servicemen, mainly Jamaican. I think when one looked at the passenger list, there were 44 Guyanese or people who boarded the ship and recognized themselves as Guyanese. The ship didn't go, as far as I know, from Georgetown because the Georgetown harbor isn't big enough. So at the time, I would imagine 13 years later, I traveled. The ship, we will go to Trinidad by air and then board the ship and then across the Atlantic. Sadly, the ship was destroyed by fire and sunk in 1954. It's interesting that it was seized for reparation. Those who are steeped in Indian history would remember the Kohinoor diamond, and that was seized from the Maharaja of Lahore, where I subsequently spent 2 glorious years, but I'll come to that later on. Next slide, please. In this slide, what I've done is trace the progress of legislation in Britain as immigration started to develop. Britain has had a long history of immigration, but not so much in quantities from the Caribbean area. And personally, I don't think it was ready for the influx that started, and to safeguard the concerns of the indigenous people, a series of legislation started tightening up how you can get into Britain. I walked into Britain with my colleagues in 1961 with no formalities whatsoever. We had a British Guiana passport, and that was that. I'm fortunate to, and like several people on the call, to have been British from the time we were born to now, because we never acquired Guyanese passport, even when Guyana became independent in 1966.
Mr. Ramurkar, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but would you mind speaking louder again, please?
Right. Has that dropped then?
Yes, it has.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Yes. I'm trying. I don't want to shout, but
yeah, we probably need you to shout, because what you're saying is very important to us, and we're really not getting it clearly.
All right. Well, I'm talking quite loudly now. Can you hear that better?
Much better, yes. Thank you.
All right. What I'm saying is that the chronological information that I've provided in this slide demonstrate the changes in British legislation to cope with the influx of immigrants, in particular, sad to say, from the Commonwealth. And for the Commonwealth, you can read between the lines what that meant. It meant the new Commonwealth, not the old dominions. And so by 2021, there was a commission which looked into immigration and race relations. And there was to say, we no longer see Britain deliberately rigged against ethnic minorities. Now, I don't want to be political, but I think the British people on the call will know which government was in post in 2021. And then the question is Britain a racist country? This is the next slide. Sorry, next slide. Is Britain a racist country? My view, honest view, is no. Britain isn't a racist country. When one looks around the world and see the discrimination in other parts of the world, take for instance America, Southern America. You couldn't have a meal in a restaurant. In South Africa, we allowed racism to exist for many years. Yes, there are pockets of people who, no matter what you say, they are going to be racist. But my personal view is that Britain isn't racist, and maybe we can talk about that in the question and answer. Next slide, please. Having said that, and we're talking about the Windrush, there is a clip from David Lammy, who is now the Foreign Secretary. But this clip was made at the time when there was tremendous concern about how Windrush people were treated. Can you play the clip?
that the relationship between this country and the West Indies and Caribbean is inextricable. The first British ships arrived in the Caribbean in 1623, and despite slavery, despite colonization, 25,000 Caribbeans served in the First World War and Second World War alongside British troops. When my parents and their generation arrived in this country under the Nationality Act of 1948, they arrived here as British citizens. It is inhumane and cruel for so many of that Windrush generation to have suffered so long in this condition, and for the Secretary of State only to have made a statement today on this issue. Can she explain how many have been deported? She suggested earlier that she would ask the High Commissioners. It is her department that is deported here. She should know the number. Can she tell the House how many have been detained as prisoners in their own country? Can she tell the House how many have been denied help under the National Health Service? How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their job? This is a day of national shame, and it has come about because of a hostile environment policy that was begun under her Prime Minister. Let us call it as it is. If you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. And that is what has happened with this far-right rhetoric in this country. Can she apologise properly? Can she explain how quickly this team will act to ensure that the thousands of British men and women denied their rights in this country under her watch in the Home Office are satisfied?
Mr. Speaker.
Next slide, please.
Even think.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Yes, just give her a second. She has to stop the video and then return to the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
You can continue speaking if you like.
Yeah, right. The next slide is, I've put a slide there from Lord Macaulay, British Parliament in 1835. The next slide from that, please. Move the next slide, please. We've already had that. The next slide would be, I've got the next slide in front of me. Can you?
You can go ahead and speak to it. It's okay.
In that, Lord Macaulay say, I've traveled across the length and breadth of India, and I've not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I've seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is our spiritual and cultural heritage. And therefore I propose that we replace our old and ancient education system, our culture, for if the Indians think that all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them to be, a truly dominated nation. The arrogance of that statement. And when we talk about inbred...
Hold your mic. Hold your mic. Please hold your mic.
And deep racism, that is what people are referring to. Thankfully, we have moved beyond that. Now, next slide, please. In this presentation, we're talking a little bit about the background and how Indo-Caribbean people have contributed to life in Britain. And what I've done is just give you a glimpse of my family life in Guyana. You will see that I've put the Muslim sign, the Christian sign, and the Hindu sign. I am from a family that my father was strong Hindu. He spoke Hindi. Well, I would imagine it's Bhojpuri to my Aji. My Aji is on the extreme right, bottom right, and I couldn't. We couldn't trace when my nana arrived, but my nanny is in next to my Aji there with my sister Ina and my dear brother who died unfortunately to the left of me. My family came with the coolie ship Mercy in 1904. My grandfather, my Aja, who is on the left, he seemed to have arrived uh, years earlier. Then he went to India and he returned. And we're trying to find out why on earth did he go to India and return? He died in 1940 and left property in Unity to his well, in the hands of his wife, and then subsequently to his children. And when my mom died in 1948, my dad married a Muslim lady, and that is why I am proud that within my upbringing, there's Christian, Hindu, and Muslims, the three great faiths of the world. Certainly, in Guyana, I was reprimanded once and said the other great faith is the Jewish faith. Well, I didn't have the Jewish experience with me, so those were the three great religions that I respect and follow in different way. Next slide, please. My journey, and this is a journey of a lifetime, a journey of 64 years. I arrived in Britain at 17 and 3/4 in July 1961, and then joined the Air Force almost immediately. And in 1963, I went to Cyprus in the Royal Air Force. And as you see there, on the left is me, because very shortly after, religious war broke out in Cyprus between the Greeks and the Turks. And then I was in the medical branch, and on the right of the slide is we became part of the United Nations peacekeeping service in Cyprus. And the medals in the middle is the General Service Medal and the United Nations Peacekeeping Medal, which I was awarded. Life in the Royal Air Force gave me a basic understanding of working, of living, working with native people. And one of the duties that we had to do is clean the loo. And on the right-hand side is me about to go and clean the loo. Next slide, please. Then I joined the National Health Service. In 1970, July, I left the National Health Service. And then in November 1970, I started a career in the National Health Service. I entered the general management cadre. At the time, it wasn't felt that a brown person would be in general management. So they had mostly going to nursing and to a less extent medical profession, but in particular nursing. So from 1970, 90, by 1985, I became a chief officer at Dartford and Gresham Health Authority in Kent. And on the left-hand side is the health board, and that's not me growing, but standing on a chair because all the other guys were taller than me. My contribution here as an Indo-Caribbean person, although I didn't really think of myself as that, I was getting on with the job. But my contribution is on the right-hand side, leading a project to build a £7 million 18-bedded unit for mental health patients. And on the right lower is having successfully done the first one, £23 million major project in Springfield in South London. And on the left is Springfield Hospital, which I think Vidur lives in South London, you could see. In the middle are people who have helped me in delivering the project. So,
Mr. Ramakar,
yes?
I'm just going to interrupt your presentation. We are running low on time,
All
and
right.
Randolph Williams asked a very interesting question that I want to pose to you on his behalf. His question is, did Indian Windrush migrants have problems with recognition of residency by UK immigration? Can you respond to that, please?
Say that again, please.
Sure. Did Indian, and here I want to differentiate Indo-Caribbean, for example, did Indo-Caribbean Windrush migrants have problems with recognition of residency by UK immigration?
Not so far as I'm aware, because most of us who came in that period were British subjects. So India was independent in 1948. Most of the Caribbean countries didn't become independent until much later. So my feeling was, no, we hadn't the same immigration hurdles that Indian people from India had. Next slide, please. I will try and hurry up with the slides.
Yeah, thank you.
And then I went to Botswana. Now, why I put this slide up? For my lifetime, I've always sought to learn more about African places, and I was delighted when I was appointed to lead 4 British consultants to Botswana, and Princess Marina Hospital was extended from a normal hospital to a district general hospital servicing South Africa. And there I learned the courtesies and so on, which how elders are treated in Botswana, how the ladies will slightly lower a knee in greeting you. And it was really a very lovely experience and enriched my knowledge of African people. Next slide, please. And then I did consultancy in Masasi in Tanzania. I went there and advised them on running the hospital. The hospital had a history with the Anglican Church, my advice to them was concentrate on developing maternity services. That was the greatest need, and don't worry about managing a major hospital. They took that advice as well. So that was another tranche of African experiences, which helped me in working with people.
Excellent. Mr.
here's
Mr. Ramrakal, we have another question here from Dr. Rosan Kanhai. She asks, has there been joint activism between Indo and Afro-Caribbean migrants in England?
Yes, I will come to that if I may. Please remind me, there's a slide that I will talk about.
We need to move on. We need to move to that question immediately, sir, if you don't mind. We have two speakers left, if you don't mind.
Well, yes, there has been tremendous. Well, move on then from this slide, and then I will talk to it. Okay, that is a slide in which the collaboration between Indo-Caribbean and Afro-Caribbean is to the fore. In 1993, when Guyana changed the government, the gentleman in the middle of that picture is the High Commissioner at the time for Guyana, Lal Singh, and we formed Guy Health UK. And if that picture was enlarged, you will see the different races there. It was celebrated as one of the key achievements. You've gone too far, yeah. In bringing Indo and Afro Caribbean people together, and that has been my driving force. I've listed there a number of things which I, as an Indo-Caribbean person, have done in bridging the gap between the races. At the bottom, we'd formed the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Association, the Indo-Caribbean organization. We had an Indo-Caribbean Cultural Association, but I went to Pakistan and then it flopped. And when I came back, with the assistance of my dear friend Arif Ali on the left, we restarted Indo-Caribbean culture. And Suresh Rambaran, another dear friend, is pictured there, who was very much involved with us. Other pictures there describe the connections that I have had as part of Guy Health UK with the Guyana government. At the top right hand is Lal Singh and Leslie Ramsamy, who's now ambassador in the EU. And I took them to Springfield to develop some sort of link, virtual
Okay,
link.
Mr. Ramrakal, thank you. Could you make your closing comments now, please? Thanks.
Right. Well, would you move to the last slide then? Before that is briefly as a magistrate in England from 1981 to 90, which is again contributing to British life. Next slide, please. And the Liberal Democrats. It was once said that you can get the number of Liberal Democrats in a black taxi. Now they are 22. Now, a splendid career in Liberal Democrats, 1982. I joined in 1982. I'm still with the Liberal Democrats, and we have had spectacular successes. Time doesn't allow me to say the different things.
Yes, but you've
Ne-
done
ne- all right,
exceedingly
ne-
well, sir. We
all right,
really
next.
appreciate what you've shared. A very, very insightful presentation. Thank you
Yes,
very,
but
very much.
yeah,
And I would
but
like to bring on our other two presenters because I want them to elaborate on some of the information that you've presented and also respond to some of the questions that I would have posed you on behalf of our participants. So thank you very much, Mr. Amrika. We really appreciate it.
thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our fourth speaker is Jaina Ali. She grew up as a mixed Indo-Guyanese and Egyptian woman from Wembley. She has a deep understanding of migration stories. Her grandparents moved to London during the Windrush era as a misunderstood ethnic minority. Welcome, Jaina. Go ahead with your presentation, please. Jaina, can you unmute? It won't allow. You should be okay now.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So hopefully the beginning bit will be actually quite quick because I wasn't sure at what point in this panel I'd be speaking. So a lot of the beginning is just a bit of context of the Windrush generation. Could we go to the next slide, please? So just really quickly, obviously the the West Indian diaspora is known as the Windrush generation, was an era of the Caribbean immigration that took place between 1948 to 1971 in Britain. This took place because of the Second World War, leading to a lack of laborers in Britain, and obviously people were called to rebuild. And at this time, 3 generations of Indo-Caribbeans had already settled in the West Indies. Can we have the next slide, please? So migrants came to Britain in a response of lack of post-war labor, and this was an opportunity to improve themselves in ways that were not possible in the West Indies. However, in a retrospective view, the era in the generation has been casted wholly as Afro-Caribbean. The Indo-Caribbean migrants are described as unacknowledged in both public awareness and academic inquiry. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is not to embarrass Maria because I didn't know that she would be speaking on this panel, but she knows how much I respect her knowledge and her dedication to the work, and we've worked together previously. So there are also some sources that highlight this concept of representation in the Windrush era. So Khalidine, who's Maria, who spoke in the beginning, her article, Hidden Histories, Indenture to Windrush, explores the lack of representation towards her father's generation of Indo-Caribbean migrants. Maria describes her encounter of first seeing a picture of the Empire Windrush with its passengers ready to set sail to the motherland, and notes that she was mesmerized by the passengers that could only be descendants of indentured Indians. She concludes that the lack of representation towards the hybrid race is rooted in the lack of depiction towards indentureship. I really highly recommend, if anyone has any questions for Maria, that they get it out now because she is such a wealth of knowledge, and also her writings are exceptional. So in 1952, my grandfather, Nazir Ali, he migrated from Guyana to London at the young age of 24. He was one of the earlier migrants of the Windrush era and came to no family or friends. Upon his arrival, he set out to gain education, which wasn't available to him back home. Leaving his wife and 2 young children, he embarked on a journey to better his family's future. As the years progressed, Nazir was able to establish income and education, and he sent for his wife and eventually his children to join him in the UK. In 1958, Nazir purchased a store on Hessel Street, in which he would set up halal butchers to aid the lack thereof, whilst also supplying to the Bangladeshi community that would attend the Commercial Road Mosque. In 1959, he moved the butcher shop to Stoke Newington and settled into the community. In 1960, many families, both Afro and Indo-Caribbean, were moving to the UK to benefit from the post-war lack of labor. During this time, Nazir's community consisted of his Muslim Indo-Caribbean family and the large Pakistani population that had settled in the era. Due to the lack of mosques in the area, that year, Nazir held Eid Salat at his house. This was the beginning of a long history regarding the Muslim Indo-Caribbean community in London. In the coming years, Nazir worked towards setting up places of worship for all Muslims in the area, regardless of race and ethnicity. He saw a dire need for the spaces in the Muslim community and worked to provide that. In 1962, he converted the basement of his butcher shop into a mosque for the community in Stoke Newington. During the could we go back up, please? Thank you. During the 1970s, he led the Walthamstow Forest community to purchase a property that would be used as a mosque. The following year, the next door property was also purchased to contain the mosque in the basement, the madrasa upstairs, and the remaining rooms were let to Muslim students, which would fund the upkeep. In 1978, a carpet warehouse on Lea Bridge Road was purchased and turned into a mosque by Nazir, raising funds through the community collection, donation from prestigious individuals and loans. This mosque is still up and running today. And also, Uncle also mentioned my uncle's mosque, Uncle Ali's mosque, which is in Haringey, still up and running. And I highly recommend that people go and visit because it's a beautiful exploration of religion, identity, being Indo-Caribbean. It's very accepting and it works widely with its community. If we can go to the next slide, please. So within the Caribbean diaspora in Britain, women had an extremely unique experience as they often migrated to support their husbands whilst they were studying or working. In many cases, women initially left their children in the Caribbean, and once they had settled in Britain, they would bring their children over. In 1948, when the Empire Windrush arrived in Britain, there was only one female passenger on board. And when I think of that, I often think of, we are often told stories of when our ancestors came from India to the Caribbean. And there's a lot of stories of women traveling by themselves from India to the Caribbean. And you have to think of the time that they were traveling by themselves and how scary that must have been and what an accomplishment that is. And then when you think about the first Windrush boat that came to the UK and there was only one woman on there. As the Caribbean diaspora became well established, the proportion of women migrating to Britain rose. In 1951, the percentage of Caribbean women in Britain was 37%. A 1961 census shows that the percentage of women rose to 44%. Whilst migrating to join husbands and relatives, the women also moved to Britain for employment opportunities. In most cases, women were both the caregiver, breadwinners, whilst their husbands were in education, and also maintained the domestic work. In turn, were burdened by the triple shift. When my grandmother, Zubaydah Ali, came to the UK, she became the breadwinner in order for my grandfather to gain higher education. She used the domestic skills that she had learned in Guyana to work as a seamstress. Please, can I have the next slide? The majority The majority intended to return to the Caribbean, but due to political and socio-economic fears, this rarely happened. And when we think about migration as well today and in recent years, it's the same story. People migrate to Britain with the hopes of always returning back to their country, to be able to gain education here and gain, income, and then hopefully return back. But again, that rarely ever actually happens. So in 1961, the Great British Census shows that there were a total of 9,273 Trinidadians living in Britain and 10,889 Guyanese residing there too. By 1981, the Trinidadian population grew by 7,061, along with the Guyanese population growing by 10,797. Between 1969 and 1976, the Indo-Guyanese population made up 31 to 47% of the total Guyanese migration. It is extremely difficult to know the exact numbers of Indo-Caribbean people living in Britain today. This is due to the lack of diversity on British census forms. Based on the percentage of the Indo-Caribbean people in the Guyanese community, it is shown that in that time, there were roughly 6,500 to 8,700 Indo-Caribbeans from Guyana alone. If this was doubled to roughly indicate offspring that were born in Britain, this gives figures ranging from 13,000 to 17,400. However, these figures are purely based on one country and do not include the other Caribbean islands that migrated over with Indo-Caribbean descent, nor illegal migration. This could suggest that these figures are an underestimate and actual figures might be a lot higher, which was not accounted for. During an interview conducted with my auntie Rahima Ali, who's actually the wife of my uncle Ali, when asked about the lack of representation towards her ethnicity, she would say that she would just put British on the form because she didn't know what, there was no Indo-Caribbean. This lack of portrayal contributes to the ever-growing misrepresentation of the Caribbean. Not being able to identify with other ethnicities often left Indo-Caribbean people of the Windrush era socially isolated. Exclusion was experienced with smaller Caribbean islands, such as Barbados, where Indians were not brought to as much, and the population never experienced them as a part of them. The British Asian community of that era did not welcome Indo-Caribbeans to identify as one of them, as they differed when it came to religion, social, and cultural forms. The Asian population did not understand how one does not know their specific ancestry and believed the Indians within the indenture system originated from low and untouchable clans. They even came to the conclusions that laborers would have mixed with African clans over the years. Due to the exclusion experienced from the Asian, Afro-Caribbean, and white communities, the minority began to create institutionalized activities. An example of this would be the religious mosques within the Muslim Indians in Trinidadian and Guyanese communities. Could I have the next slide, please? So in recent years, children of the diaspora have been passionate in their fight for representation in Britain and the wider world. Since COVID, younger generations have been digitally connecting to communities in Canada and USA to share common experiences and create wider communities and find a sense of home. So this was a collection that I actually created as a part of my university project. And it was about the experience of women in the Windrush era as Indo-Caribbean women, and that connection to your roots, but then also the connection to almost the motherland. And as a result of creating this collection, I've actually managed to connect to so many different Indo-Caribbean communities across the world. I've actually noticed some of them are in this chat as well. And so it's been a really beautiful experience of seeing how the younger generation is able to utilize the digital experience to connect.
Was that it? Your presentation?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Jana, are you related to Shobidan Ali?
I don't think so, or at least I don't know I am, because I have been realizing that there's people I'm related to and I have no idea. And then I find out and I'm like, well, we're all cousins, aren't we?
All right, so we'll have to link you both. Perhaps you are related, maybe not. But an excellent presentation. I want to thank you very much and thank you for elaborating on what Uncle Vidur would have said. He did mention your uncle and so on. We appreciate it. I'm going to ask to hold all questions and comments for Jana until we get to our next presentation because we only have 8 minutes left. So thank you very much, Jana. Let me introduce you to our final speaker today, and this is Selena Jane. So a little bit about her. She's a British artist of Indo-Guyanese descent who creates art based on the experiences of her family's journey from India through indentured labor to Guyana, and then the migration to the UK in the 1950s as part of the Windrush generation. Welcome, Selena. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Can you see my slideshow and hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here. I want to start by saying I'm not a historian or academic. I'm an artist and my slideshow will be primarily visual. I create art about my family's stories in multimedia, and I've recently started exploring through film as well. I'm a visual storyteller, so I engage with communities and with individuals to draw their stories, particularly those of migration, not just of the Indian diaspora, but migration stories in general. And I'm particularly interested in the double diaspora experience, how culture shifts What do you bring with you? What do you leave behind? I'm going to share some family stories, some really personal stories today. And my mum is in the audience, so I'm hoping I get it right, but she might tell us if I don't. And then I'm going to share some of my artwork with you. So as I say, the stories are really personal, but they're just me and my family's experience. My dad came here to the UK in 1956, and he was following his brothers who were already here. They had started arriving from 1952, I think. My Uncle Danny got here in 1954. And when I asked him why he came, he said, I came for the adventure. He went to Trinidad, and from there he got on a big boat and he saw the white cliffs of Dover as he came in to England. The other men and women on the boat were all really young as well. They were in their 20s. He just took a small suitcase with him, but he stuffed it full of clothes. He had so many clothes in it that when he got to customs, he was asked if he was opening a shop. So I guess he had a lot of clothes. When he got there, he took a train to Paddington and he was really excited. I asked him if it was really cold, because we hear that a lot about people coming from the Caribbean. And he just looked at me as if I was crazy and said, no, it was summer. When he first came, he lived in Brighton Road in Stoke Newington with his brother, my Uncle Ray. And houses there now sell for on average of £1,380,000. So I'm guessing it's a little bit of a different type of area now. He was always really proud of the work he did, and he wanted to work. It was another reason that he came to England. So he left school at 15 to be a tailor. And when he came to London, he worked as a tailor in the East End. I have his really precious dressmaking scissors, which are a real treasure, as I make clothes too. And he remembers going to buy them with his boss. He went to the West End to buy them, and he treasured those scissors all his life. Decades after he stopped making clothes, he still kept them amongst his sparse collection of belongings. He worked for Moss Bros, which was an outlet factory in Bowles Pond Road in North London. And he did piecework, but he made a point of telling me he could do the whole job. He used to make family clothes as well, and I have really fond memories of seeing my mum and dad and in their matching purple checked, really flared flares, which he made in the 1970s. And after that, he worked at the post office for 27 years, and he was really proud of that. He sorted mail, which I couldn't imagine doing that for 27 years, but he was so proud of it. He had a certificate commemorating his service, which hung in pride of place in his home. My dad said to me, before we came here, you would think it was heaven because Britannia ruled the waves. But he said he never felt British. He couldn't feel British. It was not possible. He said that they steered clear of white people generally, and they really just kept to themselves, to their own community. But he really rarely talked about racism. He would kind of gloss it over to me. But my mum said that generation that arrived in the 1950s did talk about it amongst themselves. He said we kept to ourselves, and he mostly, stuck with Caribbean people. He said he would go to work and come home and cook, but he was never bored because there were lots of people like him, lots of other migrants here. But he did used to go to the dance halls in the West End. There was one in Leicester Square, the Empire, which I went to when I was younger. And he danced to tango music with the Irish nurses. He was particularly good friends with an older English couple, Mum and Uncle Charlie. You can see them in the photos there. And their real names were Nellie and Charlie Broad, but we called them Mum and Uncle Charlie. And my dad lived with them for a while. And Uncle Charlie got my Uncle Danny a job on the buses. And he later also became a bus driver as well. And they were also friends with Miss Marion Barry, who you can see in that picture with the Cutty Stark in the background. She was a local councillor, and they were all wonderful friends to our family. Mum, Mrs. Broad, taught my mum how to cook and to knit. And we used to go to the seaside with them and for picnics, and we saw them really often. Mum made all my dolls' clothes for me, and she knitted for us as well. And I really miss her. I still miss her because she was like a grandmother to me. And this was at a time when landladies would say, we're full up, when someone, a Black or Asian, inquired about a room vacant sign, and people would complain about cooking smells and were not welcoming. We were really lucky to have these wonderful English friends, and they really impacted our lives in a big and positive way. Just echoing what Jana said earlier, Indians from the Caribbean were kind of in limbo. They didn't belong in either camp. We weren't really Indian enough because we didn't speak any Indian languages. We didn't wear traditional clothes, and that meant we weren't welcomed in some communities either. So my family socialized a lot at home. My dad and brothers learned to play dominoes from other Caribbean people that were here. And that sound of the domino tiles slapping on the table, laughing, shouting, sucking of teeth, those are the sounds kind of of my childhood, really. In 1968, my dad went back to Guyana. It was the only time that he would go back. He never went again, but he was fortunate to travel to many other places in the world. He went home to find a wife. So by the time my dad had actually bought a house in North London in Islington, and we still live there today. And my mum came from Guyana when she was 18 years old, and she was already married. And she said to me that she feels the people who came in the 40s and the 50s had it harder than her. They really paved the way for those that came later. Like Jana was saying, they created those communities, those mosques, those places for us to gather. And she said personally that she doesn't really identify with this term of Windrush generation having come at a later time. My mum came with just a small suitcase filled with clothes that she couldn't wear because it was so cold. It was August 1968, but she was really excited to come to see places like Buckingham Palace, which she'd read about in books. And it was really a big adventure until reality hit. Because it was a completely different way of life. Everything was cold, it was shut in, and it was horrible not knowing anyone. She was on her own, you know, it sounded very lonely for a young person. But my mum also says that she doesn't dwell on the past. She's moved on and life has been good. And she says you just get on with living. My mum said, England was good to me. I got my degree. I got a grant to do my degree. I got a job. I did loads of courses and different things. It opened my mind to a world view. I don't know if I would have got that in Guyana. I may have, I don't know. It's got its upside, it's got its downside, but it was more up. It wasn't all bad. And I wanted to share that because I thought, you know, that was that's her view of you know, being of that generation and what it meant coming to England. I wanted to share this artwork with you. It's a 1.5 meter by 2 meter charcoal drawing on paper. It's the story of 6 generations of my family, my parents, and my nephew Samuel is there, who was born in the UK not very long ago. It tells the story from India via sugar to Guyana, where my family had a shop in Stabrook Market. It talks about houses on stilts, the hard life of my grandmothers, then coming to London full of hope, you know, by sea, the brothers playing dominoes, dancing at the Empire, my teenage mum in her 1960s wedding dress with that tiny suitcase full of unsuitable clothes, and so many details about my wider family. I created this work for a solo exhibition I had back in Aylesbury in 2021, and it sparked so many conversations about migration experiences. I remember one guy just running up to me, running up and pointing at this drawing and shouting, "That's me, that's my life." He was so enthusiastic, and I really was by those connections. It just chimed with him. I had conversations about this picture with Afro-Caribbean, Indo-Tanzanians, Irish, Czech migrants, or descendants of migrants, and they all said that there were elements that they identified with. And I think art has this power just to take us to other places, to stir up emotions and memories. And with all migration stories, there are these gaps in knowledge, just the things we don't know, or maybe we have to guess about them, or sometimes I have to use my imagination. And some of my drawings are based on maybe just a small memory, maybe just a sentence handed down through generations. I'd really love to share this piece again. It's quite large and detailed. So if anybody's got any ideas about where I can display it, then please get in touch. My dad died last year, and the year preceding was really painful, distressing, and confusing for him and for all of us. And much of that time was spent in University College Hospital in London, where I spent hours just holding his hand and drawing pictures of him. And many times, if you asked him where he lived, he would say 93 Bel Air Street. But actually, he lived in Caledonian Road, which was 10 minutes away from the hospital. But in his head, he was in Bel Air Street, All Boys Town, Georgetown, Guyana. He'd been in the UK almost 70 years. And when I asked him about Guyana, he said, "Nah, man, it's too long ago." But it's funny, at the end of his life, when his brain just went back to that place, to Guyana, to that house in Bel Air Street. And I'm very grateful to Jana's family for that space, because my father went to that was his mosque, her family mosque. And that's where he was in his last place before he was buried. So really grateful for that space that her family created. As an artist, I'm honored and privileged, and I'm invited to draw people's stories. And this is a recent project that I did with an organization called Together Productions, which took place over a couple of years. It was sparked by Windrush Day 75, and it encompassed many migration stories from across the world, including migration stories happening right now. It focuses on stories of people coming into, through, and out of Thurrock and the surrounding areas, including Tilbury Docks, which, as we've heard, is where Empire Windrush docked. So I was live drawing people's stories at Tilbury Docks of people who had landed there. It was a real privilege to draw this picture. There were over 50 different stories in this picture, including some well-known families like Floella Benjamins and the Windrush stories of Sikh migrants who had come from India in the 60s as well. And really, everyone is just looking for the same thing, for opportunity, for safety, for a good life. And all these stories involve changes. Maybe, like Jana said, people came here for a short amount of time thinking they would go back, but actually they stayed and people's lives were changed forever. I did several stories for sharing our lives, and I'll put the link in the chat, but there's a link on this slide as well where you can see all these on the website along with the other creative output from the project. And this is the last one I did, and it's particularly special for me as it's a Guyanese story. Eugene's mum is Guyanese, and she came here in the 1950s, and Andrea is Guyanese, his wife, and came here to the UK in the late 90s. And Andrea brought with her roti, the classic, and Guyanese cooking, which is really much appreciated here. And also lots of memories of a childhood climbing trees, riding bikes, and playing cricket in hot Guyanese sun. I'd like to share one final drawing with you, and this is called Celosia. So some of you may know this flowering plant as coxcomb. My mum grows celosia in her North London garden, and my grandfather grew it in his Guyanese garden. So maybe what we take with us when we migrate is a plant, a seed, a memory, a suitcase of suitable or unsuitable clothes, but it's all special. I've just returned from an amazing trip. I went for 6 weeks to meet family and to see family in Canada. My auntie Shireen is here on this call as well. I think I have more family in Toronto than I have in Guyana now. And one thing that's been really interesting to see the striking cultural differences compared to our lives here. It's very, very different. Their culture is different in that I think they've retained more of Indian Guyanese culture. And it was really interesting for me to see the differences in the diaspora on another continent. And it's something that I'm going to be exploring in my next series of work. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting. I tried to speed up on the time. There's some links here that might be of interest for you, and I'll put them in the chat. And the second one links to Jana's story as well. My studio is in Croydon, in London. You are all invited. I'm always happy to connect and to share art and stories. Thank you so much for having me speak.
Fabulous, Selena. Absolutely wonderful. I love your depictions, and so do many members of the audience. Thank you very, very much for sharing. Did you say that your mom was in the audience?
She
Can we
is.
have, what is mom's name? Can we have mom unmute, please?
Oh, Mom, sorry. Zena. She's
Is
gonna
she here? Mom, we would love to have you say hello at least. We've
take yourself,
already.
take
Sorry.
yourself off mute, Mum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how is it?
Wonderful to have you. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you, Selena. That was wonderful. Thank you.
So, Mom, we have several questions that have remained unanswered on our chat, and unfortunately, we have now gone over our time by 10 minutes. So, I just want to ask you very quickly. I know your husband had a different experience from you when he went to England. My question is this. The Windrush generation and Windrush on the whole, that whole story became known to us because of the deportees. Do you or your husband know anyone who was deported?
Who, me? Yeah, you asking me?
Yes, you or...
No, I don't know. Sorry, I don't know anyone who was deported.
No reason to apologize. We appreciate that, but we are trying to get to whether or not any persons from Trinidad, Guyana, Trinidad or Guyana in particular, or any of the other islands who might have gone to the UK would have been deported, and if so, were they Indo-Trinidadians, were they Afro-Trinidadians, or anything like that? Have you gotten reports from anyone about their relatives being deported?
No, I don't. Not
You're
personal experience. No.
Okay, well, share a little bit about your experience. Selena, I see that you want to say something. Go ahead.
I think for my family, because we had passports and they left the country. So because they had, so a lot of people that came over didn't go and get passports, like didn't do official paperwork, because they didn't need to. They were here and they weren't going anywhere. But our family and we went, like my dad traveled all over the world. He'd go to Egypt, Spain. So he had that passport. He'd done his paperwork. But a lot of people that came from Guyana, and people were sent, people came from Guyana and the other Caribbean islands that came here that just never bothered to do that because they weren't ever going to go back. And maybe they came when they were really, really young. And so they didn't then have the paperwork that they didn't
necessary.
I also can I
Sure.
also say on that point?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think, and also people brought their children here and they just assumed because they came here and they were British, they were already British when they came, that it was okay. They didn't need to get a passport because they came because their parents were here and those children went to school here. They got jobs here. They went through the whole education system and they had jobs here. And it was just assumed that, yeah, of course I'm British. Why do I need to prove anything else that I'm British? I've worked here. I've got a national insurance number. I've brought up my children here. So they just assumed that they were British and that the British government would never turn on them. And they actually did. The British government turned on the people who came here to work for this country. So it was bitter. They felt really bitter. And also they felt that they were betrayed by the government. They felt betrayed by the British government. And quite rightly so.
Quite rightly so, yes. Mr. Michael Mitchell would like to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did put that in the chat as well, actually, that point about that it was often the children. And the British authorities were also to blame because although they made notes about who had arrived, they then destroyed those documents so that the people who were trying to establish their British identity couldn't do so because the British had destroyed any evidence that they had arrived perfectly legally. So this was a double blow, if you like, and that is the point that David Lammy was making. I also put the point in the chat, and of course you had a reference to David Lammy in one of the talks. And I pointed out that David Lammy's great grandmother was half Indian, so we also get an Indo-Guyanese connection there. David Lammy, of course, is our new foreign secretary in the new Labour government. Originally, his parents came from Guyana.
Right. So, Mr. Mitchell and any of the other speakers, Prem Singh is asking an important question. Why were the documents destroyed? Was it intentionally done?
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't know. I have no idea whether it was intentional, whether they just thought it's no longer necessary, the people came and that was that. And it was part of what was called the hostile environment policy under the Conservative government. Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, was trying to encourage illegal migrants to leave and wanted to make life difficult for anybody who did not have a right to be in the UK. And these people, through no fault of their own, were then caught up in that. They had every right to be in the UK, but they couldn't prove it.
I understand. I want to thank you very much for adding value, sir.
It's okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 15 minutes past our usual cutoff time. We can continue the conversation after, but I want to say at this point in time, we will bring today's presentations to a close. And I want to say thank you very much to all of our speakers. Very, very important information that you've shared, and as well to Mom Zina. We really appreciate you choosing to be here. So thank you all very much. I'll turn you all over now to the chair, Shakira, to formally close, and then perhaps we can have a conversation a little bit after. Shakira?
And I do apologize for Bella outside. Thank you all for taking the time to attend and to participate. And as we've said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. And like today, we often partner with the Amina Ghafoor Institute for the Study of Indentureship and its Legacies, led by Professor David Dean. And you can feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books, like the one that we had previously with Beto Ram Harak and the other by Shamsuddin. And remember that we are kindly asking for suggestions. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials, and you can contact Dr. Mahabir for details. Our topic next Sunday will be live conversations with elders in the Indian diaspora, part 23. So we want to thank our team, Dr. Kumar Mahabir, Daryl Gransam, Navin Mangal, Ravin Ram Singh, Miriam Mohammed. And please visit, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.
Okay, you all. So we have a few minutes left, and Uncle V, excuse me, I want to ask you, based on what